it doesn't work for us anymore. And the line got deleted out of Excel. That shifted everybody up, but that didn't change the individual payroll sheets for those individuals. So this person got paid like they did the amount of work that Larry does.
Yeah.
Which is obviously, nobody does that much work.
No, he makes.
You know, I can do some stuff with it with security in the Excel file to try
Well,
and
why
prevent
can't
that
I
from
just-
happening.
So I don't like Banyan, okay, but I don't wanna go to BSA. I know it's better, and then we would be on the same, but it's super expensive. So wouldn't QuickBooks be a better even?
I
and
don't know, I don't know if you can talk to another township that utilizes QuickBooks and is happy with it.
It's talking to other townships, they're either using QuickBooks or BSNA, they're not using Banyan.
Yeah.
Not, half
I
the
think
people
you
have
and the
never heard
village are
this.
like the only two in the state anymore, or
That
there's
use
just
Banyan.
It's
Yeah.
very old software
Yeah.
when you look at it.
You know, so if we switch, is that also something then that I can put the fire department payroll in for hours to keep track of?
I mean, QuickBooks does do payroll, so, yeah.
They do it all.
But was the total payroll correct? So the total wasn't even correct, okay.
Those two, there's only two individuals that were wrong,
Okay,
and it was because of that one deleted thing,
so just two.
Yeah,
Okay.
our net variance is like 370 or something like that.
Okay.
So, big picture, probably not that big a deal.
Just have to
It's not
remedy it.
right, but it's not the end of the world.
So cut some cells out and it just shifted, shifted
'Cause
the
the-
cells
So-
out, yeah.
You got all these individual cells like
Yeah,
Larry.
and you delete it and it says shift cells up or just.
His thing is
yeah.
saying, look at B4 on this page, well, you deleted B3, and so now he's looking at the
Yeah.
wrong line.
Yeah,
Didn't have all the stuff in there.
So do I tell Mark and have Mark have the conversation? Do I have to have a?
No, I think Mark's the chief, he should be the one to have that discussion. If I have to, I will, but I think he can do that job. You know, that's part of the deal.
as long as he relays the information accurately,
Accurate, if I
yeah.
have to be a part of it, I will gladly do so. I don't know how you fix the 941s, yeah, and all that stuff.
Nick, since he doesn't have a Zoom link,
Tell
how
him
does he join?
tell him to check
Oh.
his junk file, cause for the first attorney, I went to their junk folder.
Yep, it'll be coming from Alex Busman at Banks Township on Microsoft.com.
Yeah, it's a different address.
Apologies for
Remember the days of meetings
lateness.
in here? Yeah. What, 2019 and before or something?
Do you have an invoice for me? You
No.
have, you have a few more days.
Yeah, it
I
probably,
sent you the stuff for the board of review, right?
it probably won't be.
The receipts?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's already in. And then a flooring one.
You didn't used to be that expensive
Board review or
to pay
flooring?
buy food for that.
He found it.
Alright, good deal.
Foods reserve.
It is indeed. Hi Nick,
Hi, how are you?
good, you guys hear us alright?
Yes.
Alright, we got you
Can you
loud and
hear me
clear.
okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Good.
Fantastic. Well, welcome. Looking forward to hearing from you tonight. You know, I think Richard, but you certainly know Marv. Richard Frisky, another trustee. I'm the supervisor, Alex Bushman. Katie Postmus, our treasurer, and Julie Chalice is our clerk over here. I've got some questions here. We'll see how many of them we get through that we've asked the other law firm as well, and see how we do. We got some members of the public here behind us, and yeah, with that, I'm gonna let you give your spiel ahead at the beginning instead of the end this time. How's that sound?
Sure. My name's Nick Curcio. I have a solo practice in the Grand Rapids area. I'm really close to Spring Lake, if you know where that is.
Yep.
I worked in Grand Rapids, coming out of a clerkship out of law school, in one of the bigger firms in the state there, actually. I was in their municipal practice and stayed there for about 7 or 8 years. My mentor left to go in-house at the city of Wyoming, which is kind of a big suburb of Grand Rapids. I thought that was a good time to kind of go out on my own, so I did that. And I've had my own firm for about 6 years now. I do largely municipal work. I say probably 75% of my practice, and even the other 25 is, well, some of it's municipal or state, local government related. I represent a number of cities around here, on the west side of Grand Rapids. And also I have one township that I'm general counsel as, and I've served as special counsel for a number of townships over the years as well. Familiar with all areas of municipal law, a lot of Open Meetings Act, Freedom of Information Act. I've got zoning experience, just general governance. I don't know if you have authorities like fire authorities, sewer authorities, that type of thing. Actually represent a number of water sewer authorities as a general counsel. Very active in the Michigan Municipal League. I'm on this kind of state board of directors, and through that I'm involved in picking which cases, usually Michigan Supreme Court cases, are really important to municipalities, and then we'll file what's called an amicus brief on behalf of the MML. Taking a position on the side of municipalities. A lot of times we'll partner with the Michigan Townships Association on those. I've also authored a number of those briefs in addition to being on the kind of the board that steers as I try to keep that number manageable so that I can be responsive to the clients that I have and not get too many clients, in which case service would start to dip. So, but I think I've got capacity to take on, especially a smaller township, and confident that I'll be able to do that.
All right.
You answered the first 3 questions.
So,
Yeah, I followed through the first couple, for sure. Yeah, so we got that one figured out. Yeah, you wanna ask the second one?
Yeah, so 75% of your clients are municipal. How many are like a small townships, and how would you describe working with public officials? How do you work with public officials? What's your experience?
I'm counsel for Saugatuck Township, which is a relatively small township in Allegan County. And that's my only township that I'm general counsel for. I've also counseled to a number of smaller cities with a population under 3,000. So they're a little bit different, that their statutory makeup is different, but in terms of the needs they have, they're fairly similar. I have in the past have been counsel for some very large cities, but currently my city clients are on the smaller side. I am very familiar with township law, even though I just have the one client I'm general counsel for. I've been their attorney over a decade, and I've also done special counsel work for townships on sewer issues, on zoning issues, just a number of things where their general counsel attorney had conflicts. So I've got quite a bit of township experience. In terms of working with municipal officials, obviously I serve at the pleasure of the board, so I try to not play favorites among when a board is divided. I try to keep in mind that I work really for the people of the township as represented by their elected official, and that boards have to act as boards. I'm not counsel for any of you individually. I'm counsel for the township, and I kind of take my direction from the majority of the board. I also try to keep my personal opinions to the extent I even have them, and I tend not to, especially on a far-flung township. Your issues are not my issues. I will take your direction and try to execute it and to kind of minimize any liability that could potentially come from it, and otherwise keep you legally in line.
What's the difference between a general counsel and a special counsel?
General counsel means that I'm your regular township attorney who handles any issue that comes up. Special counsel would be if the regular attorney feels he can't handle something because of it requires special expertise, or if they have a conflict. Maybe some municipalities have local attorneys as their counsel, and sometimes they represent businesses within the community, and there's things like that where for whatever reason the township attorney can't handle it. And sometimes it's bigger projects like rewriting a zoning ordinance or litigation or something like that. Will occasionally get referred out.
Well, I think we got 3 here, unless somebody else wants to ask it. Julie, you want to go on to the next one?
Can you describe a case you litigated that has significant implications for the township you represented?
So the Saugatuck Township had a zoning case that went to the Michigan Supreme Court a few years ago. It was one that was covered by insurance, and insurance assigned an attorney, so I was not the principal attorney litigating it, but I worked closely with them throughout that case. It involves the development of a really expensive waterfront parcel for relatively large number of residential units and a kind of high-end marina, and it's being challenged by tribes as well as environmental groups who don't want to see the property developed. So as the township has been kind of navigating between the developer and the environmental interests and trying to just make sure we're applying the law as it is, and trying to reach the correct result under our zoning ordinance as written. And I've worked very closely with the litigation counsel in that case. I've represented them in that township in a couple of smaller ordinance enforcement and zoning matters as well. My larger cases and municipal matters have tended to come with the MML. I just filed about 6 months ago, filed a brief in the Michigan Supreme Court on behalf of the city of, MML on behalf of the city of East Lansing on a bolt challenge to the fees that they charge for operating in their rights of way. So I worked on a number of fairly kind of high profile municipal issues in that capacity, not directly representing the municipality, but representing this Michigan Municipal League on behalf of local municipalities.
Okay. A couple decades ago, we had our legal counsel negotiate a very lucrative contract with American Tower. And today that's about 1/3 of the income for our whole general fund. They keep wanting to renegotiate. So my question to you is, what contract, or have you negotiated a contract that has brought in, been a cash cow for a township or been a windfall for a township?
So is that on a water tower, or is that on a
cell phone
parcel where
tower.
they built a tower?
Cell phone.
They built a standalone cell phone tower on a township parcel.
Property.
Interesting. I've negotiated several cell phone contracts, typically for installations on water towers. I don't know that I've ever done any freestanding ones, but even those ones where it's on an existing installation, those can make quite a bit of revenue. A lot of them are coming due, as it sounds like yours is. I think a lot of them were built approximately 30 years ago. So I've been pretty active in renegotiating those in the last couple of years as well. I do a lot of real estate. I said 75% of it is municipal. It's a fairly significant portion of the other 25% is real estate, which kind of comes in handy for municipalities sometimes.
amazingly, that one goes out to what, 2077, I think? Yeah, it is.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't like it. They do not like that
I've
contract.
never negotiated the cell phone tower lease that long. Your old attorney did a good job.
Well, yeah, well, to be a judge, right?
Yeah, Elsenheimer, a state rep, and yeah, he went on to bigger and better
Yeah.
things.
Can you provide an example of a policy that you drafted or interpreted that positively impacted a township?
Policy, and then does that include ordinances?
Specifically on policies, yeah,
Specifically policies.
for the board, for the township, yeah. Ordinances are later.
Okay. I've done, and this isn't necessarily your situation, but I've, in a couple of communities, worked on policies about how the board interacts with each other, like ethics policies, for boards that were not functioning very well. And the ones I've done are actually cities, but the same principles would apply, I think.
Yeah.
Laying out ethics and just treatment of staff, treatment of each other, those types of things, and have had some successful experiences in doing that. For the township, the policies that come to mind are things kind of compliance with new statutes. I remember doing several policies about Open Meetings Act compliance during the COVID period and about implementing the new FOIA regulations when those came out a number of years ago. Those types of things have been kind of my township policy drafting experience.
Okay. Julie?
Can you describe how you managed a legal crisis that affected a township body?
Crisis. Can't say that my township has ever had anything amounting to a crisis. But the litigation has been, this zoning litigation has been very contentious, with members of the body not necessarily having the same viewpoints on whether, I guess, which side to favor, to the extent of favoring either the environmental groups or the developer. So navigating that while navigating a pretty complicated legal case that goes all the way to, went all the way to the Supreme Court. Making sure I was advising the township correctly on the law, but also keeping in mind the politics that were at stake with the board. That's been challenging. It's not a crisis in the sense that it just comes in one day and we've got to deal with it, but it's something we've been dealing with for like 7 years essentially as this litigation goes on. And I think that's been a good experience, and both tackling complex legal issues, but also complex local political issues.
What measures do you take to ensure ethical compliance in your role as a township attorney?
Is there a specific type of ethics that you're asking about, or just general rules of professional responsibility?
Maybe be specific about anything between board members, for example. How would you avoid any pitfalls there? And then you can go to the general as well.
So, especially with my cities, I channel my communications through a single person, and that person is the city manager. And then my township is a little bit unique in that it has a township manager, which I gather you don't. And that's been how I've handled that situation as well. I've had enough experience with other townships to know that is not, having the township manager is not particularly common, especially in smaller townships. And I would kind of defer to the wishes of the board as to how to best communicate. I think typically legal communications go through the supervisor. There is a statute that says the supervisor is the legal agent of the township. That would be my kind of I wouldn't say preference necessarily, but my recommendation in terms of how to communicate with your board, or to the extent issues arise with it, with you as a body, either in a special a meeting where you're going into closed session or during your regular board meetings. That certainly the board as a whole can direct by motion and majority vote, direct the township attorney to write a legal opinion or any other matter, legal matter. But I think in general, communication with the entire board is not always possible or practical, and having the board collectively kind of direct me as to how to provide that communication is helpful, and I think the supervisor is the most natural person in most situations. And in terms of other ethical compliance, I mean, I'm careful to avoid conflicts in the legal sense. Being on different sides of the same transaction, even if it's not adversarial, like contracts and things like that. I don't represent many people up in your area. I don't think it's likely to be an issue. I don't represent big national companies like cell phone carriers, those types of, I wouldn't be on the other side of the cell tower transaction. I just don't represent those types of clients. But I am cognizant to avoid conflicts and make sure my billing is compliant and all those kinds of compliance measures. I've studied up on avoiding those pitfalls when I open my own firm, and if I've got systems in place to ensure that.
Okay, that's good, thank you.
All right.
Sign on it that says, "Only the public come in,"
I can do that.
but you should do that, otherwise it looks like it's a closed door session.
All right, in your opinion, why is zoning good for townships? Or why is it not good?
I think it really depends on the community and what you're trying to accomplish. And I've had communities with greater and lesser zoning restrictions, and I think the smaller the township, the more likely the more common it is to have very limited or even no zoning. You're not technically required to have zoning under the Zoning Enabling Act. I mean, the benefit of zoning is it keeps uses apart from each other that potentially create conflicts in the way that kind of the law of what's called nuisance used to do before zoning was invented. Certain types of industrial uses can cause adverse effects on residential uses if the residential use is sufficiently close to it. Those types of things. But obviously, the downside of zoning is that it can stop people from using their property for ways that they want to use it, and depending on the circumstance and the lot size of the community, that kind of attitudes in the community, each board gets to kind of find its own way to balance those trade-offs. And if you have sufficiently large lot sizes and a population that wants to keep the community kind of more agricultural or rural and in nature, maybe very limited zoning is appropriate, and just kind of separating uses into commercial, industrial, and residential might be all that you need. If the community wants a little bit more control over their neighbors, then something more restrictive than that might be what works best for the community. And as I said in answer to an earlier question, as your attorney, I'm not really there to make those types of policy decisions, but to help you as a board effectuate them and write the kind of ordinances that you think are best for your population.
Thank you.
Tell us about your experience in handling land use and zoning issues.
I have, as I said, I've had communities that kind of run the gamut. It's a former client now, but I had one city that was really into kind of complicated and detailed zoning ordinances and did a lot of zoning ordinance enforcement. And I helped them with that, litigated several cases for them, as well as a lot of updates. Complicated zoning like ordinance like that needs a lot of updating regularly. So I've had that experience. I've also had experience of helping kind of pare down a zoning ordinance, remove regulations, and those types of things to streamline it, make it more user-friendly for owners. So I have experience both on the drafting side as well as on kind of the day-to-day enforcement communities in communities that do active enforcement.
Is the door good?
When we close
There's a
it-
note on it.
Yeah, when we close it, it's a closed door. We
No,
can't
that's
do
fine,
that.
I got that.
Yeah.
Are we good with it?
I put a note on
Are
it
we
that says,
legit?
that says it's an open meeting,
Okay.
that the public is welcome to come, it's not a closed meeting. But I didn't still shut it all the way, cause
Sorry, I didn't wanna interrupt you, Nick.
I
All right,
think that was.
what's that?
I was gonna say, I think that was the end of my answer. So
All right.
no interruption.
Sounds good, okay.
Could have him give us an opinion on it right now. On the door.
On the open meetings, I think that's fine as long as it says, as long as if someone outside can tell that it's an open meeting, you're fine.
Sounds good. All right. All right, have you ever drafted or reviewed zoning ordinances for a township? I'm assuming yes with Saugatuck.
Yes.
Okay, how about police power ordinances, and are there any landmark cases that you might have been a part of? This doesn't necessarily be, it could be at your other firm as well, when you were there.
Okay. Yes, I've done both regulatory and zoning, quite a bit of both. And then your second question is about litigation?
Yeah, I mean, are there any other landmark cases of ordinances that, you know, or ordinance that became a landmark case, I guess is kind of what I'm trying to say there.
An ordinance that became a landmark case. I was involved, it was not exactly an ordinance, but I was involved in a dispute over a public park
Okay.
that had in the city of Grand Haven that had a lot of litigation surrounding it, including there's a, I don't know if it's a landmark case, but there's a published Open Meetings Act, FOIA case about the attorney-client privilege, basically my communications with the Attorney General's Parks Oversight Attorney. So there's, I've been involved in that type of thing. That case, or that controversy, I guess, had quite a few cases reach the Court of Appeals about control over this public park. And I was heavily involved in that. We mentioned the Saugatuck case. Went to the Supreme Court on a zoning issue. On the MML side, I've had another zoning case about the standards for a dimensional variance a few years ago that I think provided helpful guidance on what those standards are, and I filed a brief on behalf of MML there. So I've had a couple of relatively major municipal litigation cases.
How would you respond if we asked you to help us simplify our zoning ordinance from 128 pages to 10 pages?
That's a big cut, obviously. I'd have to get direction as to what you were looking to address. Sounds to me in that situation, you'd basically be looking at just separation of categories of uses, like basically residential, commercial, and industrial, with very little regulation of the actual uses themselves. You may want to have some special use provisions within that 10-page, depending on what kind of uses you have. I mean, aggregate mining is one that municipalities tend to want to regulate through special use. I don't know if you have marijuana, that usually requires some special use provisions. But that basically be the bare essentials. Yeah, a list of basically breaking down uses into those three categories, maybe minimum lot sizes, and that's about it. It sounds like is what an ordinance like that would look like, and I'd be happy to work with you on the specifics of that.
All right, thanks.
have you ever been involved in litigation related to public records requests or open meeting laws?
Yes. I've never actually defended those because they're typically assigned to insurance attorneys. in most communities those types of claims are covered by insurance. But I've certainly worked with communities on Open Meetings Act compliance and on Freedom of Information Act compliance. And I've had communities that have been in those types of lawsuits where I was working with the insurance attorney on defending them, and getting them the relevant documents. For usually the judges will look at kind of the, in FOIA cases especially, the judge wants to see what the municipality had so they can determine whether they're supposed to give it over or not. So I've worked on that, on that end of it, helping the municipality come up with the records that it had so that those could be reviewed. And the case I mentioned with the attorney-client privilege, an exception to FOIA, I did quite a bit of that, kind of having to go back through my file, finding all the communications with the Attorney General's office, and then helping put together the argument that those are covered by an extension of the attorney-client privilege, where basically if two entities are working towards the same goal, then they're essentially function as counsel. So what the court ultimately held was that the Attorney General's office was functionally the same as the city attorney's office. We didn't have to turn over documents from either office in response to that FOIA. So pretty extensive compliance experience in those areas.
Okay, I have a question about environmental law, and this is, I'm not talking about Superfund sites or brownfields, talking about more like renewable energy, sand and gravel extraction. What kind of experience do you have working in those areas of environmental law and compliance?
I have helped the township that I'm general counsel for on regulation of mineral extraction. They do have an ordinance. We've gone through the special use process under that ordinance a number of, well, I think maybe just twice, but and we've tweaked that ordinance during my time there to kind of make that process go smoother. Renewable energy, I've got kind of varied experience. With my old firm, they were actually represented several renewable energy companies. And because of my municipal experience, I got tapped into some of those representations. So we were seeking permits for wind farms and things like that. This was years ago. And so then when I went on my own, I've represented in two communities groups of homeowners who were opposed to wind energy, to kind of help on that side to either pressure their township government or actually get involved in some litigation involving the approval of wind projects. So I've seen various sides of the wind energy, I guess, debate, you might call it, but actually never represented the township in those. And that whole area has changed substantially in the last year with the new state legislation, which I've been following but haven't. And I've advised two communities on kind of putting together a new ordinance to meet that new state legislation. But that whole area of law is very different than it was even just a year ago because of the state statute. But I do have experience in kind of the way it used to be, both on the wind developer side as well as on the residents opposing wind side, and a little bit of solar experience as well. Those weren't previously as controversial as the wind, although in the last couple of years there has been some controversies in various communities across the state on solar projects as well.
Describe your experience in dealing with code enforcement. Do you think we need a code enforcement officer?
What's your population?
19.
It's pretty relatively small, right?
1,800.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's pretty unusual to have a code. Certainly as an employee, it would be unusual for a township of that size to have a hired code enforcement officer. At least in the southern part of the state, there are firms that will kind of provide it on a contractual basis, like once a week or something, to come in. And I've got client communities who do that type of situation. I don't know if that's as available up north as it is here, but it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, if light and things are big issues in the community, then maybe that would be worthwhile. But especially in more rural townships, I think, often the case that townships don't get involved in that type of thing. It's kind of goes back to zoning. It's a matter of preference of the board and what you think is the best for your community.
How about your experience in dealing with code enforcement?
I do have all my cities obviously enforce well, not obviously, but all my city clients enforce the building code, state construction code. So I've got quite a bit of experience in that, and they have, again, all the cities have either adopted the International Property Maintenance Code or their own blight ordinance. And I have most of them work with a contracted building inspector who does the actual citations and things like that, and even goes to court in informal hearings. So I'm not often involved in that type of thing, but I have prosecuted a few of the property maintenance violations, mostly years ago when I was a younger attorney. But certainly have advised clients on, interpreting those ordinances and regulations in the building code and property maintenance code.
So is Saugatuck a zone community?
They are, yes.
And
They
so-
they do. They have fairly heavy zoning, I would say. Not a ton of code enforcement. I've had a few issues. I did help them with a residential property that was basically looked like a junkyard. I mean, just completely trashed. But they're relatively hands off on the property maintenance stuff.
Okay.
Kind of what you just talked about.
Pretty much what you talked about, but
Yeah.
nuisance abatement, just your experience with dealing with that.
Yeah, that's a similar topic. I've had, especially in cities, I've dealt with things like squatter situations. Helping building officials kind of get people out of unsafe structures and things like that. I've had a few cases was very, very overrun junk in front yards and things where communities have asked me to step in and either take things to court or help them with citations and negotiate cleanup resolutions and things like that.
What would be your relationship to the township in regard to response time when we have questions?
I try to respond at least. I mean, I try to get you something within the day that you send it. Sometimes that's just an email that says I've got this. I'll look at it. What's your timeline or something like that. I try not to leave clients just completely hanging for very long at all. In terms of turning projects around, it depends on the size and urgency of the project. But I would work with probably the supervisor, the person that gave it to me, on what the expectation is, and try to meet that expectation. And often shuffling things around in terms of priority. And I would say, unless it's a really big project, I would typically turn things around in less than a week. But bigger projects obviously need more, and I would work with you on what the need is and do my best to meet it.
What would it cost our township for you to attend a meeting?
You are around the Charlevoix area, right?
Yes.
So it's 3 hours.
It's only 3 hours from Grand Haven. I used to live there.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Depends if you bring
just
kids with you, I
about
suppose,
time.
but.
It's challenging. What time of night are your meetings? Or it's 6 or 7 or
Usually at
something?
6 o'clock, yeah.
6 o'clock. As long as you don't have me there too often, I can maybe try to come up with some type of discount. The proposal is for $180 an hour, including driving time. But I think, for 1 or 2 meetings a year, I could probably cut that driving time figure. I'd say it's going to be around $1,500. I think I'd be willing to offer closer to, let's see, really talking 7 hours, 14. Could do 2 meetings a year at $1,200 maybe a piece.
On that same vein, you bill in what, 1/10 of an hour increments?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we try not to have attorneys here all the time, so.
Mhm. Yeah, I heard that was the case, and the distance is obviously can be challenging, but for especially for most townships, it works reasonably well to just coordinate with me in advance of the meeting, not have me physically there, and then you get to. And I think most of the municipal firms are kind of not in your area, either in Grand Rapids or in Lansing, so you get the expertise of those firms without sacrificing too much in terms of service and connectivity. Being able to Zoom is helpful.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
about a couple of years, it gets easier.
For sure. Fairly.
What do you do if we ask you something and you don't know, or it's not your expertise? Do you refer us to someone, or?
Yes, and that's pretty rare with it. I don't think I've ever referred my township client out actually, but with some of the cities I have on occasion, there's a couple areas where that could potentially happen. One is actually true environmental law. That's a very specialized area. If you have like a contaminated site or something like that, that could possibly get over my head. Major litigation that's so major that a single person firm just doesn't have the capacity to handle it is another potential area, but doesn't pretty unlikely that something like that would arise. But if it did, I still have connections in kind of the big law world, and a lot of those firms have municipal practice and municipal expertise, and it could help find you an attorney, a special counsel, but I don't anticipate that being needed.
I had a question, another one too. So being a sole proprietor, let's say we have some really extenuating circumstances, something pretty major comes up, and you're on vacation for a week. Do you have a backup? Who's your go-to? What would be our resources? Like, let's say we have a fire or we have a death or something, catastrophic. We can't wait 48 hours for an answer.
Yes, I can arrange you a backup. A lot of my other clients were clients with me at my old firm, and my old firm still serves as in that capacity. Some of my newer clients, I've worked with another solo attorney who's also a municipal attorney. Her name's Crystal Morgan, out of the Holland area, and she's happy to serve as a fill-in when I'm on vacation. I have a young, large family, and we don't go on a lot of extensive vacation, so that's not. That hasn't really been an issue. We are traveling a little bit this summer, but never more than a week. And I'll make sure that you're covered for that week.
Did you say that $180 an hour was good for how long?
I don't remember what I put in the proposal. It was either 2 or 3 years. It probably says in there.
I recall 2 years, but I don't know if
Okay.
anybody else saw it.
Seems familiar. What do your other clients get charged?
My municipal clients are either, so 180 is a slightly discounted rate. Some of them are at 190. Don't believe any of them are below that at this point.
Okay. Any other information you'd like us to have before we make a decision on this?
I think we pretty much covered it. I'm looking forward to work with you if this is the direction you decide to go, and I'm happy to answer any questions if they come up before you make a decision.
Anybody have any more questions? All right, Nick, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time tonight, and we'll be getting back with you. We're gonna vote on it next Monday night, so we should be able to
Okay.
tell you on Tuesday. All right?
Okay, great. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye. Back to the agenda. Any public comment? You good, Dave? All right. Can't quite see it, so.
here.
I can see that you're there. I just can't see your mouth or anything. All right. Any board comments? If not, I'll call this meeting adjourned.
What's wrong with this meeting room? This is good.
It's warm.
Nice little
I have to
meeting
wear a
room.
decent shirt with short sleeves. But overall, it's not too bad.
What do we have to do to this room?
So these tables actually go back out there, and then a round table was in here.